Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is episode 146, Build versus Buy, when enterprise companies should stop doing do-it-yourself translation. It's a great one. I feel like we've talked about this in different flavors, but let's get rolling, Patrick. I think you have a good news story, an interesting one, I think, yeah?
Yeah, it was a funny one from Shocker, not Slater this time. Sorry, Slater friends. But this one is from Pew Research Center, and they found a glitch in a survey or survey set that they were running, which pretty comically, to me at least, replaced all of the options in their survey questions that were supposed to say yes with forks, which was pretty funny. So it's a very long and detailed article, again, very funny. So they got it in a few bits of feedback when they solicit feedback on the survey results that they were sharing out. But people tend to understand, like when they were taking it, that forks meant yes. But they launched a big investigation to why this was happening. And one of their engineers, they said, scoured the code, and nowhere in their code did the word forks appear. So they were just baffled at why this was happening. So after doing a lot more testing and research, they found that it was a result of Google Chrome specifically picking up the browser language of the person who was taking the survey. And they seemed to think that it was Spanish. So then it just auto-translated the page and flipped yes over to forks, which was a bug in Google Translate. So very interesting story if you want to nerd out about how they found the issue and fixed it. But basically, in their survey logic, they disabled Chrome from being able to auto-translate their survey, which was their ultimate fix for the issue that they found.
That's absolutely crazy. My bigger question is, why does Google Translate have forks for yes in Spanish?
That was, they included a screenshot that I'm looking at right now. It says Spanish. It's a Spanish word for yes, which is yes in English. They back translate to forks for some reason.
Hilarious. That's a good one. That was a good sleuthing one. I like that. So, all right, well, let's roll into our episode. So let's set the stage. As we always say, we sort of anonymize things for the safety of those that are involved. So it's a little bit genericized in the story, but let's pretend you've got a VP who speaks Spanish and a developer who knows Python. And hey, Google Translate is free. So how hard could translation be, right? Today, we're asking about that expensive moment when companies go, hey, this is awesome. I'm going to do DIY translation. But then they suddenly realize, hey, this isn't scaling.
Then the forks hit them.
Then the forks. Yeah, exactly. Then yes equals forks. That's exactly what happens. So why don't we get started? And I think a good spot is, maybe to talk about some of the use cases, right? So it's like, you hear this pretty much in a lot of different companies, like, hey, our marketing coordinator speaks French. Let's just have her translate the website on brain catheters. We'll use Google Translate and have bilingual employees review. Like that one, I think I shared recently. I heard something similar, and the solution was to have their CTO review it, which I thought that's good use of a very low paid.
I wonder what I wonder what the CTO's hourly rate is.
Yes, exactly. It's not $5. I'm sure it's not that. And then another one of my favorites, hey, let's just hire a freelancer on Upwork for 5 cents a word. That sounds amazing. Or our developer can build a custom integration with an MT API. So that one I actually heard in a partner discussion. It's like, well, got pretty far down the road. Here's some things we can do. We can certainly integrate machine translation or a trained engine or some AI or whatever the case is. He's like, yeah, our developer said we can just do that with Google. So we're just going to do that. So,
I mean, not to throw developers under the bus, but like most content management systems have some sort of MT or AI integration where you don't need a developer. You just flip on the translate button for the website, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually true. And then what we've been talking about translation as a feature and, how that shows up all over the place now, because everybody likes the magic button. Everybody loves the magic button. Why don't we just use the magic button?
I mean, yeah, we've talked at length in WordPress and WPML, like the base functionality of WPML allows you to machine translate if you want to.
Yes.
No really little to no developer needed to do that.
Yes, exactly. So why do companies get there? Why do they even entertain these discussions? Patrick, you start. I've got some options here.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's I think of this in a similar vein of like IT, of like, okay, IT is great until something goes wrong, and when it goes wrong, you need to have a small army of smart people to fix that issue for you. I mean, some companies, depending on the size, bring IT in-house, some outsource it completely. And that's not to say either model is good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just you have to know the limitations with the model that you're operating within. So I think that's what we're kind of getting at, is kind of the DIY can work to a degree and to a certain point. But there's also a certain point of scale and size that it just simply won't work.
Yeah. I mean, really and I think for those of us that are in the industry, and when we hear these types of things, I think you have to dig, right? As any good salesperson would do, is you dig. And, is it budget? Is it a budget constraint, or is it even perceived savings, right? So you have to walk them down that path and help them understand what that ROI discussion is. Because like we had that conversation with that client, and when I gave her a blank stare and said, oh, his time can't be inexpensive, it was like a bright light kind of, oh. So it's amazing to me that wasn't like a concern, right? Like, should have been. And small initial volume too, right? So some people might just say, well, hey, it's just one page. Let me just do a quick copy and paste. Like, I think of that as well. Your example was a good one in overconfidence, right? So if someone says like, well, we've got Joey over there. He used to work at an IT company, even though he was in marketing, right? So like, he used to work at an MSP. Maybe he can do same thing, right? In bilingual staff, like people will say, oh, we've got, this person over here, and they can do that, and why can't they translate?
Yeah, I mean, imagine giving a customer support person your technical manual and saying, "Go do this in your second or third language."
It doesn't make any sense, right? And that underestimates complexity, right? So as well as these days in translation, sometimes people don't think of like what it takes to deliver. So you're talking about websites, right? So it's like a Word document is one thing. You open up a Word document, you type over the top. All right, okay, maybe you can make that argument, or a PowerPoint. But what if it is a website? What if it is an e-learning project? And so suddenly you discover, oh gosh, we have to have, there's audio prompts and there's on-screen text, and looks like there's text that's embedded in images. We need to. It's like all that complexity is certainly underestimated, and I think that's probably how people find themselves here.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about most language companies, it's like it's our job to take away all the stuff that the linguist doesn't need or want to see. We can take the website example. Websites are full and full and full of code. We strip all of that out, so they literally just see words on a page, and that's all they'll focus on. They can still see the rendered web pages and reference materials, but it's like we strip out everything that they don't need to see to really focus them on like, okay, your job is to take this from the source language and put it into the target language, and like we'll handle the rest through parsing and through making sure that we're able to input and round trip the data in the way that it needs to be done.
Absolutely. And I think, someone in our extended audience is probably going, these guys are making this sound so hard, right? So it's got to work sometime for somebody. So, and I think for me, Patrick, the answer there is, rarely. I think, we know the use cases where DIY can work, and, maybe it's just an internal email or just a rough draft for internal use, or maybe it is that one pager and it's low risk or something. So no, someone's going to say, well, that was genius. I'm glad we used this person internally. But I think there's very few instances where it works phenomenally well.
Yeah, I think anytime where we've talked a lot about, technical things, regulated industries like finance or healthcare and things like that. And really anytime like your brand reputation is at risk as well, as I think another time probably not going to work. I think another good example, and I mean this kind of goes back to like where machine translation at its start kind of had its place as well. It's just like anything you need to get the gist of is always fine for that type of stuff. It's like, okay, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be good enough. But again, in those regulated industries or when you're putting your brand reputation on the line, it's probably not going to end well.
Exactly. Um, so let's dig a little bit more into, the hidden costs, the things that maybe people don't see coming. And I see there's really a couple different categories here. And I think, we start with quality, right? And I mean, let's think about this. So if you are that company and you're putting out instructions and it either goes on your website or it goes in packaging, I mean, how many complaints are you going to get about unclear instructions? So now that reflects poorly on your product. You have more calls coming into your call centers. Potentially you get bad reviews on Amazon or wherever you sell your products or your wares, if you're B2C or whatever the case is. And I think that's huge. Like that's a cost that people don't understand.
Yeah, I mean pretty comical nowadays of the stuff you get on Amazon that as soon as I crack open the manual, I can tell what country it was manufactured in by reading the English translation of the instructions. But I mean that's like you said, that kind of puts your brand reputation at risk when you're putting out something that might not be the most high quality.
Yeah, and I guess for some of those manufacturers, maybe it's understandable that hey, it's a very low cost, product, and it's okay. But if that's not the case, you're going to suffer some brand damage. And I mean, I even think of like for those of us that do a lot of shopping online. I mean, if are you losing sales because your descriptions aren't strong enough, or your features aren't spelled out well enough? I mean, my gosh. And then going back, I mean, all the bad, the damage you can get from reviews, I think it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
At some point as well, I mean, if we're talking about clients that depend on compliance issues, right? I think you covered that earlier. That's not great. I mean, what about opportunity cost, Patrick? Right. So we talked about the CTO doing reviews. What else what's in that?
Yeah, and just keep in mind for our audience that we are operations nerds talking right now, so we're going to get into the weeds of what all those things mean. But opportunity cost is basically the cost in our example of taking your CTO off of their day job and what kind of value you're losing by pointing them in a different direction rather than pointing them at their day job. So just for the sake of doing some fun math, we are not a math company or a math show. Just going to preface that, but we can take an employee making 120K a year. Let's say they spend 10 hours a week on translations. That's $31,000 you've sunk into translation cost by using that internal resource.
Yeah, that's not much of a bargain when considering a professionally managed translation that has repetitions and overlap on updates could cost far less than that. Could be a fraction of that.
I think too, an interesting point on opportunity cost is that's assuming one language.
Right, right. And then, then the other problem comes like, we don't have anyone for this language. So now you're managing multiple vendors. You're managing your two employees. Well, this guy handles this guy handles that. And they have probably wildly different skill levels as well, either in their language or in their understanding of the source content. And then you're like, I guess we have to send this one to an agency. And it's just craziness. You're essentially spending all that time managing a band-aid.
You're doing the same job 3 different ways in that scenario.
Yeah, that seems like a bit of a nightmare. And, if there is some development, I just think of the time of, what could that dev have been doing for you? Creating something more on the front end to help you attract more clients, or it doesn't really make sense.
Releasing new products with web pages.
Where you actually make money than just avoiding a cost.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about coordinating freelancers. I mean, those are all things that an agency should do for you. But I mean, it also stems right into the lack of consistency, right? So if you don't have that translation memory or that database, I know these days people love to love to degrade the value of translation memory, but I mean, let's just call it a database, right? However that asset lives is just where you store your translation that you've done in the past, and also terminology management for glossaries and such. I mean, if you don't have that, or you don't have someone looking after that, I mean, it's going to look like 12 different people write your translations. I mean, that's really what it's going to look like.
I think that a value that agencies bring to the table is agencies will connect their freelancers, like we've talked about before. If there's a relevant question in the database that they're working on, the answer is shown to every other linguist, so they don't have to ask the same question. So if one person asks it, all your language pairs get the same answer. Whereas in this model where you might be managing an agency, a freelancer, and an internal person, that's tripling the work you need to do internally just to manage that workflow.
Yeah, and the quality is going to be all over the place since it's varying degrees of talent, I would imagine. And I think, the other problem is really the scaling issue, right? So, sure, you can have your person down the hall, whatever role they play, for 5 pages. Well, maybe that takes them a day. Now, it shouldn't take a day, but maybe it takes them a solid day. What do you do when you have 500 pages, or you have, a massive website redesign? I think that's where that model breaks. And there's really, you mentioned the multiplication by languages. So that's absolutely a concern. Yeah, if it's just Spanish, but then if you add 11 languages, it's absolutely crazy. And there's really no audit trail. And I think that that's a big thing as well, or version control. So who's responsible for that translation if there's any issues? And I just think,
think change management too. What happens when you change a sentence?
Terrible. So without the translation memory, you're redoing the whole job again, or someone has to painstakingly create a differential, where any good translation agency can handle these sort of things with the tools that they use. And I mean, I know we've talked about this radical concept before on our podcast, and it's called communication. But I mean, so we started the episode with talking about the reasons why people land here. I mean, why not just sit down with your translation vendor and say, hey, I've got a budget problem. I need to do this job, but I have a tight budget. Can you give me the options? Because these days, of course, most translation service providers, language service providers, have the ability to use these tools, and they should be able to lay out different options for you when it comes to working up and down the budget spectrum. And I think we beat this one up a little bit, but I mean, rework is really the issue. You and I have had some projects that we've worked on in the past where, the clients made mistakes on whether they had someone internal review it who wasn't qualified, or they had translation that we inherited and had to be redone because the quality was poor, and not you're paying for it twice, right? So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think why DIY is appealing is the barrier to entry is relatively low. Like, yes, it seems easy to do this. Yes, there are free tools out there. But I think, we're kind of deconstructing where the quality of that falls down, and why it's like super important to find a language partner who understands the issues that you're trying to solve for. Like you said, like, we could do the same project 10 different ways if we wanted to, or knowing different budgets or following different workflows. But unless you lay out for the vendor, like, what you're trying to solve for, they're just going to be guessing. And that's freelance, that's DIY, that's anyone's just going to be guessing. So, like, lay your cards out on the table and say, like, here's what we're trying to solve for. Help me figure that out.
That's the approach. Again, that radical idea of communication. But I think if you lay that out to your provider, and guess what? If they're not able to help you, then try a different provider, right? So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about what's the tipping point for customers? When are some times that in this debacle that it's like a clear indicator that they should probably think about moving to a professional?
I did just read The Tipping Point in the book, by the way. So fun choice of words
Malcolm
here.
Gladwell. He's got a great hairdo. If he still has that, I don't know. When he released that book, he did. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we covered a couple of them already of really anything customer or external facing. DIY is probably going to fall down. Again, that all comes into brand reputation. We cover some of the more technical or regulated industries, like finance, healthcare, legal, all the fun ones. Really anything technical. Again, I think, like, sure, I speak English and Spanish, but if you even asked me to write a technical manual for a defibrillator in English, I would have no idea what I was doing because that's not my strong suit. But also kind of getting into the realm of web or SEO or GEO, really anything that's, affecting your organic search rankings is also really important to get that right, so that you're showing up for the right things, and you're sending the right signals to Google or Gen AI engines to get the right traffic to your site.
Absolutely. And if those translations are off, those things aren't going to happen. And I think there's certainly like operational triggers. We talked a little bit about how your internal resources are bottlenecked. I mean, at what point does someone come over and say, hey, you know, the marketing manager that you're making translate that 100-page manual, they actually have marketing things to do. I know this is a shocker, but they've been busy just translating your manual. I mean, that's the thing, right? Or the manual takes too long and you're going to miss a release date. And what does that cost you? And I think, those deadlines can be a serious issue. You certainly can't scale into new markets, right? So if you decide you want to go to a new country and a new language, okay, my Upwork strategy is
time to hire someone new.
Yes, exactly. Or in the early days of translation, there were some providers that we used to, or partners that we used to work with, and they'd be like, like fill in the name of the blank language here. I wonder if there's a new, like, let's say it's just Ethiopian. I wonder if there's a new Ethiopian restaurant in town. Maybe I can go find someone to translate this Ethiopian document. It's just crazy. It's like, that's literally how people used to recruit linguists. And this is just a little bit better 21st century, version of this. So it's really not that much better. So, and how about strategic triggers? I mean, really there's, where localization becomes a competitive differentiator. I mean, these days, you don't know. I mean, there's companies that the US isn't their strongest market. Their strongest markets are abroad. So question becomes, wouldn't you want to spend some more money on translation so it becomes a strength for you rather than something that you just take care of with a Band-Aid?
Yeah, I think too, like something that's we haven't talked about yet, it's probably underestimated, is like the amount of infrastructure and tools and workflow that an agency can offer you that you just don't have to worry about. Sure, you might see per word pricing from an agency that not only buys you the translation itself, it buys you the access to the translation management system. It buys you access to their AI. It buys you access to the translation memory. It buys you a lot more than like literal word for word translation. Sure, people have some fees that are outside of per word, whether it's project management, engineering, however we want to slice and dice it. But I think, and maybe selfishly because I am a project manager, like I think that's worth every single penny that you possibly can throw at the project management budget. Of their goal is to make your project fit your budget, number one, and number two, be as efficient as possible.
No, I like that a lot, Patrick. And, I think also it's important to, when you shift into this buy mode, so you've made the decision, all right, we've laid out the case. You've got one or many of the problems we just talked about, and you finally make this decision. So, what does that actually look like? And I think too many people have a preconceived notion of what working with an agency or a translation service provider is like. And I mean, the bottom line is, again, any good agency is going to walk you through the steps of like, all right, what's your budget? What are the pieces that you absolutely can't afford to do internally that have to be done by professionals? And they might even tell you, it's like, oh, those emails you're receiving in foreign languages, yeah, that's not bad. Just plunk those into Google Translate, and half of them might not even be relevant. Maybe they're spam. They can work a strategy with, hey, you're getting calls into your call center. maybe you can use over the phone interpretation and not necessarily like hire a bunch of bilingual staff.
Yeah, I mean, even
All those
form fills on a website just to validate that they're not
Yes.
spam form fills. Just again, that's a great use case for either DIY or just pure MT. It's just like chuck it through, see what happens, make sure it's not qualifying whether it's a real lead from your form or not.
Absolutely. And then if you need professional help with the response or whatever the case is, you can get that. But again, any agency I think is going to help walk you through the paces. So a hybrid approach I think makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we said make sure you use the right tool for the job?
Absolutely. We've talked about that a lot in our podcast. And, I think it's very important, like internal only documents that are just for, for research or for reference, that's where you can spend less budget and, go upstream when you're working on stuff that's more sensitive or more mission critical. I think the absolute minimum that you should look for in a translation provider, right? And I know we've done some shows on choosing, but I think just to reiterate, because of course the technology's changed, the world's changed, everything's changed. They should have a good tech stack. So you should make sure they have a translation management system. They can offer some connectors and some automation. Do they have industry expertise? So, if you're a manufacturer, do they have manufacturing expertise? Do they have any, ISO registrations that speak to you? If you're in medical devices, 13485 means a lot, right? If you're a manufacturer, you might look for 9001. So those are all really important. And like, what sort of reporting do they offer? Like, can you log into a portal and see where your projects are? And can you help yourself to old projects and download reports and do all the things you need to do?
Show me how my costs have gone down over time.
Exactly. What's their level of transparency? What do their quotes look like? All those things. And I think those are all really, really, really important. And I think they're sort of table stakes, I think, for choosing a vendor.
Yeah, I think an interesting question you can ask that will give you a very telling response is what happens when we find a mistake?
Yes.
Ask your vendor. And I think you'll get a very large set of different answers on that one. But I mean, to me, the one of the best answers to that is I think any provider that says, we won't make any mistakes is flat out wrong. It's going to happen at some point.
Run.
But I think what that really gets at is like, okay, what's your process for one, just kind of table stakes like customer support, like who's going to listen to what I say when I assert that something's wrong? But then two, like, how do they react to that? It's like, okay, great, we'll investigate, we'll find out the source, we'll put a process in place to make sure it doesn't happen again, we'll update the translation memory, whatever it is. But I think, finding someone who goes into that solutions mode, that investigate and then solutions mode is probably the best answer you can get to that question.
Yeah, I love that, Patrick. Definitely. And so you've made the choice, you've chosen. So now what? How do clients transition, Patrick? How do they go from the status quo to working with a vendor?
Yeah, they just call me and I'll take all their money. No.
Yeah, there you
go. No, but I think evaluating providers is always a good first step. Again, I think sending those same questions to all of them is very important for the sake of fairness and getting, putting everyone on equal footing. I think doing sample or pilot projects with those providers is a good low cost kind of entry point. It also gives you a sense for how that provider will work with you. You don't have to tell them it's a pilot necessarily. You can just say, "Hey, I've got this small job I want to do with your agency." But that kind of is very telling. It shows you their quoting process, again, their finalization process, any reporting that might come, and that just kind of gives you a good sense for like what this relationship will look like if you want it to continue.
I like that a lot. And I think we've talked about, again, I know when we did the show, we talked about, making sure that you have apples to apples. Like, if you're looking to try to compare costs, don't make such a very vague or generic request like, can you give me a quote on 3 blog posts? And
no, send one blog post to the same exact 3 providers and see what comes back.
Exactly. And it has to be a good side by side. That way, for sure, because all too often, people will make these requests so vague, it just doesn't, make any sense.
And I think too, even if you're not going to do the projects, going through the exercise of getting quotes for a specific set of documents or assets is important. It will help them show like any repetitive content, like we've talked about at length, or any matches, and they can show you, okay, great. The first time you do this, it's going to be, I'm just going to make it up, $1,000. But when you leverage this against those other assets, job 2 that should have cost you $1,000 is now $700, or whatever the case may be.
That's exactly it. I mean, that point right there, it's a higher initial cost, right? So let's say, Patrick, I think used $1,000 or whatever it is, whatever that first number is. And you say, well, even if I do it internally and I take their hourly rate, maybe it's only $500. But guess what? When you do it again, you're going to pay $500 again because there's no translation memory. You have to do the whole darn thing again. Whereas you don't get that value, that bang for your buck out of the translation memory. The speed on the turnaround, consistency in terminology, the audit trails, all the things we talked about, and the ability to scale. Because guess what? Now if you have 2 translation projects in the same language, now they're just stacked up. It's okay. Well, they have to finish the first one before they can do the second one. If you're working with a good provider and they have at least a team of 3, kind of like how we usually do teams of 3, a translator, editor, perhaps another editor, and they're all equally trained or able to handle that content, you can scale. So you've got a few projects, no big deal. And can even scale beyond that for larger term projects that have to be done in an expedient way. So, yeah, that really takes it through. Patrick, I know you had another couple points that you wanted to talk about that are a little more in depth. What do you got for me?
Yeah. Again, I think we kind of talked about scale as well, but that's really like, okay, maybe DIY works for 1 or 2 or 3 languages. But what happens when you need 5 or 10 or 20? And again, in some of these very specialized verticals, that becomes very difficult. And again, if you're just looking at per word cost, it might not really dawn on the buyer that when you're buying language services, you're buying access to the network that those language service providers have built over the years, and all those people who have very specific areas of expertise that not every translator does. Nothing against translators, but there's a reason there's legal translators. There's a reason there's medical translators. They do tend to specialize, so that becomes really important.
Wonderful. So, Patrick, in closing, I think what are some of the things that our listeners should really key on? Like we talked about a lot of different topics. Let's expand on our typical thing. What is your one takeaway? What are a couple takeaways or things that you think they should really focus on?
Yeah, I think the operations and scale part is really important. If you're able to establish with a provider your workflow and your process and your systems that you're using, the provider can really take that and run with it and translate as many languages as your heart desires, and do as many different project types as your heart desires. I'm thinking back to when I was with Argo, and like we had clients who started with 3 languages, and by the time we were done working with them, they were on 9 languages and so many different formats that it didn't matter. All they had to do was say, hey, we need this thing. They would send me their files. I'd be like, great, it costs this much. We're ready to roll. And the process really can be that simple. For that client specifically, we were doing corporate comms, PowerPoint decks, websites. Like we were literally doing basically every format that they could think of. And it was just as simple as them either dropping me a link or sending me a file and say, here's what we want, here's the languages. And then it kind of dawns on them. They're like, oh, it can be this easy to just, truck it over the fence to my provider and trust that it's going to be done right.
See, and for every language service provider, that use case or that story, Patrick, is success, right? Because we were able to show value. You started with 3 languages. They're not going to add another 6 languages unless they have a revenue opportunity or, some sort of compliance issue they're trying to meet. In that case, it was, more of revenue generation. And I mean, that's as a language service provider, that's success is the way that I see that. I like that. I mean, for me, I think really, it's like look closely at what you've got coming in the new year, right? You wherever your fiscal year resets, or maybe maybe there's a new initiative to go international. And I think the best time to start is earlier than you think, right?
6 months before you think.
Yes, exactly. Because I think if you do that, if you have those initial meetings, you're going to get some of those gotcha moments like, hey, we're looking at these two different systems for our website. And your translation service provider can easily come back to you and say, oh, well, the one system you're looking at doesn't really have an easy way to do translation. They're still out there. Believe it, there's a lot of content management systems that do not have an easy hook in, data out for translation, where something like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla or Contentful or some of the other ones have an easy way in and out. And you say, well, this is going to cost you far less to translate. Like that conversation alone could save you so much money.
Thousands.
Just so much. I mean, because otherwise you might be having a web developer copying and pasting a language that they don't understand into a website, and we all know how that turns out. So
I think you make a good point though, of like you're also not just buying the words, you're buying the expertise and experience of your service provider. And I think for as stressful as projects that go quote unquote wrong in the moment are, I think they're tremendously helpful for language service providers because you learn what not to do. And then you can apply those learnings to your future clients so that you don't run into the same issues that other clients may have run into. It's like, ooh, I worked on this project where this thing went wrong. Or I helped this client by saying, don't pick this CMS, pick WordPress instead, because it'll make your life easier down the line. So you're also buying that expertise of like, maybe translation is new to you and you don't even know necessarily what the problems are. Whereas if you work with a provider, you've got your PM with all that experience, you've got your sales lead who's kind of seeing all those gotcha moments or where it's gone wrong, and they can help kind of steer you in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. I mean, that's great. I think this has been a great episode, and I think we'll build on this. We've got some new ideas brewing. We definitely, AI is going to touch every episode again this year, I'm sure, in one form or another. It's touching every industry.
You made it this far without it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So at any rate, for this episode of Translation Confidential, this is Peter and Patrick signing off.